Today's topic is point of view. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 tips to help you write in first person point of view. Now, over 35 years ago, I started my career as a writer, as a nonfiction writer. I was writing health and medical nonfiction. I was also working in healthcare, specifically in the area of organ transplantation. So for my first book that I was going to query a publisher about, I put those two things together and I wrote a book about organ transplantation ethics and politics. Now, that was an interesting experience, and because it was based partly on my own experience, I wrote that partially in first person. But a lot of my work was written in third person. I did at one point in my life write a memoir, and of course a memoir, a piece of nonfiction, is written in first person. And then after that I began writing fiction, and a lot of it was in third person, the historical fiction that I wrote, until recent years. And in recent years I've been writing all of my women's fiction in first person. Now, we can debate till the cows come home about whether it's better to write in first person or in third person, and whether or not it's better for the reader that way. But the fact of the matter is that there's a place for both. And there are certain kinds of books that are better when they are written in first person, and there are some that are better when they're written in third person because of the need to tell the story in a particular way. And so after all these experiences that I've had, I thought I would share with you some of my insights, some of the things that I've found out, some of the things that work and don't. So I have 5 tips for you about that. But before I get to those 5 tips, I just want to make sure that we all understand what point of view is. If you've been writing for a long time, this is probably old hat to you. But if you're fairly new to writing, this might clarify for you what we really mean by point of view. Here's a definition. Point of view refers to the vantage point or perspective from which a narrative is presented. So the point of view is all about the choice for who narrates the story and how much information that narrator has access to. The selection of point of view can seriously affect the degree to which the reader connects with the story, and it can add either intimacy or distance between the reader and the story. So of course, first person point of view is a point of view where the story is told from the vantage point of one person. And you will use pronouns like I, me, we. And this perspective provides a much more intimate point of view. But it has its constraints. Those constraints stem from the reality that the reader is seeing and hearing and feeling everything from the perspective of the narrator. When it comes to nonfiction, first person, of course, is common in autobiography, memoir, as I've mentioned, personal essays. It is also common in certain kinds of fiction, and it works better in certain kinds of fiction than others. It often doesn't work as well in, for example, crime fiction, unless you're using multiple first-person points of view, and that's also a possibility. But multiple first-person points of view, you have to be very careful about that, and usually divide it into chapters, where one chapter is told from one person's point of view and another chapter is told from another, and it needs to be very clear to the reader who's speaking. Okay, let's get to those 5 tips then. Tip number 1. Practice writing as the narrator to develop a distinct and engaging voice. You have to be that character. I suggest that you take your notebook, whether an electronic notebook or your journal, and you begin to write that character's backstory. From first person, I tell that story from the narrator's point of view. You're going to need that backstory anyway, and it allows you to really get into that character's head and to be that character. And you can then sort of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You are developing an engaging voice, but you are also creating the backstory that you're going to need. And allow that character's body type, background, where they came from, languages that they know, all of those kinds of things to develop the voice that you're going to use to tell the rest of the story. Tip number 2, be consistent. This is extremely important, particularly in first person. You have to be very careful about things like the narrator's expressions and personal quirks, for example. These are the kinds of things that have to be consistently used throughout the narrative, and you can't fall into the trap of having the narrator sound just like any other character in the book. Tip number 3, at all costs, avoid head hopping. This is the cardinal sin of first person. You cannot know what's going on in someone else's head or in some other location where the character, the narrator, is not located at that moment. This is of necessity a constraint in first person point of view, but it's so important. For example, if the character, the narrator, is interacting with someone else, the narrator, me, cannot know what's going on in someone else's head. You cannot hop from my head, the narrator, into someone else's head and know what they're thinking. You can only make inferences from what is being heard and what the other person is doing. And I'm going to give you an example of this. You can't say, Mary was so angry she was considering killing me, because you don't know what's going on inside Mary's head. You might be able to say, Mary was so angry and she looked at me as if she could kill me. That's how you can say it, but you can't say Mary was thinking about killing me, because you don't know what Mary's thinking. This is a constraint of first person, but it can also be kind of fun to figure out how to do it. Tip number 4, be careful to show and not always just to tell. You know, you're always taught to show and not tell in your writing, but when you're writing in first person, it gets very easy to simply tell people about what you're thinking and tell people about what you're going to do, instead of showing them why you're thinking something or why you're feeling that way. Show people what's going on. So the narrative becomes a description of what's going on as opposed to always telling. Tip number 5 is use personal insights. This is one of the greatest advantages of using first-person point of view. You can use all of those interior opinions and emotions and motivations and perspectives and thoughts that come into the head of a narrator of a story, and use those as a powerful way to convey the story to your readers. Writing in first person can create an intimacy with your readers that you cannot do with any other point of view. You know, third person point of view I'm going to talk about sometime. Second person I'm never going to talk about, because I think we should all just kind of step away from it, but that's for another day. I suggest you have a little bit of fun in writing something from first person point of view. Get yourself inside someone else's head and be that person. It can be a lot of fun. Happy writing. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat. And maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.